There is an old saying among the country solicitors who prove the wills of the dead, that a man may buy any number of hands to swear to a lie, but he can never buy the one witness that matters. That ink may be aged and a seal cast and a dead man's name set to a paper he never once saw, but there is always somebody who was in the room. A nurse, a servant, a poor overlooked cousin by the fire, who knows what the dying man truly did, and truly could no longer do. The whole art of proving an honest testament is to find the one true witness the forger forgot was there. For a forger reckons every great person who might be bought or dazzled, and never troubles to reckon the person that nobody in the house has looked at in years. Honora Ashe, Nora, to the 2 or 3 below stairs who were fond of her, had lived at Aldermere Court as its poor relation for 21 years, and in all that time scarcely a soul above the rank of housekeeper had troubled to learn her Christian name. She was 40 when the story properly begins, a spare, plain, quiet woman with a still gray gaze and steady hands, dark hair going early to gray beneath a plain cap, so unremarkable that a guest might sit an hour in a room with her and go away unable to say there had been a fourth person present. That was the whole of her strange gift. She was the person one did not see, and so she was the person who saw everything. She had come to Aldermere at 19, an orphan and a charity, after her own father, an honest, unlucky country gentleman, was stripped of his rightful inheritance by a cousin's lawsuit and a will nobody could make honest and nobody could prove false, and died of it within 2 years. She had learned before she was 20 the lesson she never unlearned, that in England a thing written and sealed is believed, and a poor person's plain truth is not, and the whole distance between the two ruins the innocent every day of the year and is called the law. She kept, from her father, 2 things only, his small horn-cased pocket almanac, in which he had noted his rents and his weather, and into which she had gone on, all her life, quietly setting down the doings of whatever house sheltered her. A habit of exact remembering that was half grief and half self-defense, and his plain steel-rimmed spectacles, which she wore to read. At Aldermere, she had made herself into the thing such houses use and never see, the poor relation who reads to the half-blind old lady, writes the letters the gouty old gentleman can no longer manage, and sits up the long nights with the sick, at every table and in every sick room, and never at the center of anybody's thought. What the county said behind its fans was uglier, and she knew it. For let a plain, penniless spinster be a poor relation under the same roof as an unmarried duke, and the drawing-rooms will settle in an afternoon what they would not trouble to ask in a year, that she is a schemer, a fortune-hunter who has crept in by the charity stair and means to creep up by the great one, and that a woman of her age and her empty purse can have no business near his grace but the oldest and most shameless in the world. Nora had heard the word fortune-hunter reach her from behind a fan more than once in 21 years, and had learned to let it break over her like weather, but she had never grown a skin so thick that it did not, each time, cost her something. The old Duke of Aldermere, Ambrose, the 4th of the name, a great, kind, open-handed gentleman whom the whole county had loved, had died that spring after a long and dreadful sinking, and Nora had nursed him through the worst of it, because there was no one else the failing old man would suffer near him at the end but the quiet gray woman who did not fuss and read to him in a low, even voice through the bad nights. And so Nora Ashe, alone of all the household, knew certain things about the old Duke's last year as intimately as she knew her own hands, and had noted every one of them in her father's almanac, without the least notion that she was assembling, night by night, the exact and only key to the ruin that was even then being prepared. The trouble came up to the house on a wet afternoon a fortnight after the funeral, and Nora, sorting the late Duke's correspondence for his grieving old sister with the almanac open at her elbow, did not think herself concerned in it at all. "You'll not have heard, I'll wager, Miss Ashe," said Sally Coombe, the young parlor maid, hanging in the doorway with her cap askew. "It's all over the servants' hall. The lawyers were shut up in the great study since noon over the old master's will, and there's a codicil, a new writing put to the will in his last weeks that nobody ever heard tell of, and by it the whole of the money and the Netherley estate and everything not tied to the title goes not to his grace at all, but to Mr. Slade. Mr. Slade. And the young Dukes to have the title and the old walls, and not a shilling to keep the roof on them. Isn't it a wicked shame, miss?" Nora's hands went still upon the letter she was smoothing. "A codicil," she said quietly, and did not look up. "Signed when, Sally?" "It's dated the 4th of March, this year past, a bare month before the poor gentleman died. Signed and sealed and witnessed all regular, the old Duke's own hand and his own seal, and 2 names to witness it, and nothing to be done but abide by it. £40,000 and the Netherley lands and all, away to Mr. Slade. That's only a cousin and the man of business." They say his grace sat like a stone when it was read. "The 4th of March," Nora repeated, gone very still in a way the maid was too full of her news to mark. "And 2 witnesses. Did the clerk say whose names?" "One's the lawyer's own clerk that's dead these 2 years, and the other's old Reeve, miss, the old master's own man, Reeve, that waited on him 40 year. His name's set to it as a witness, seeing he was always by the old Duke, which does seem right and natural, only Josiah Reeve," said Nora, and something cold and enormous had begun very quietly to open in the middle of her. "Died on the 19th of February. A fortnight before the 4th of March. I sat with him at the end, Sally, and closed his eyes myself, and it is written down where I do not forget such things. A dead man cannot witness a paper." The maid stared. "Well, but the lawyers are all satisfied, and Mr. Slade's own attorney come down from London. Who's to say the great gentlemen are wrong over a bit of a date?" "Who indeed?" said Nora, and made her plain gray face as empty as the window, and bent again to the letters. "It is the hall's business and none of mine, Sally. Her ladyship will want her fire made up. Go on, now." But when the maid was gone, she sat a long while with her hand flat on the closed almanac, only holding it, and out of the window the rain came down gray over the park where the old Duke was newly buried, and she felt the past come up under her like a cold tide. Her own father's stolen birthright in a paper nobody could prove false, and thought, not again. Not if I was in the room. Not while I know what I know. She learned the young Duke sidelong over the next days, in scraps carried up to the morning room. He had come into the title but half a year, on the death of the great uncle who had raised him as heir, and whom he had loved past the common measure, a spare, dark, reserved man of 33, with a fine grief-worn face and cool gray eyes, who did not bluster, but shut himself in the study half the day, and came away with a face like a closed door. He was resolved, they said, to abide by his uncle's last wishes however they wounded him, for to contest a dead man's plain sealed testament was to call that beloved dead man a liar, and to drag the honored Aldermere name through a public suit, and he would sooner be ruined in silence than do the old Duke's memory that violence. It was a proud grief and a lonely one, and it made him, like her own poor father before him, the perfect prey. For there was a man ready to prey upon him, and his name was Roderick Slade, a cousin of the family through some female line, a smooth, well-preserved gentleman of 45, trained to the bar in his youth and grown into the old Duke's most trusted man of business, the very man who had managed the estate's affairs and held its confidence through all the years of the old Duke's decline. He had a pleasant, sorrowful, reasonable manner, the whole county's good opinion, and a barrister's exact knowledge of what makes a will sound in law: the executing, the witnessing, the sealing, the proving in probate. He was grieved past expression. He let it be known that his patron should have chosen so to distinguish him above the young heir. He had not looked for it, but a dead man's wishes were sacred, and it was not for him to refuse them. It was all very smooth and very legal and very kind, if one did not look too near. And there was no one in that grieving house, in the raw first weeks of mourning, with the knowledge or the standing or the sheer nerve to look near at all. No one, that is, but the gray woman by the fire, whom Mr. Roderick Slade, reckoning every soul at Aldermere who might trouble him, had never once reckoned in his life. It was old Lady Emmeline who set her on, the late Duke's sister, 78 and rheumatic and near bedridden, but with wits as sharp as a needle. "They are robbing my great-nephew Ashe," she said, rapping the arm of her chair, "over a paper I do not believe my brother ever set his hand to, and no one will lift a finger, because it is sealed, and Slade is respectable, and grief makes fools of us all. Ambrose loved my great-nephew better than his own soul, and told me 100 times the whole of Aldermere should go to Alastair whole and unbroken. He was not a man to say a thing to my face for 30 years and unsay it in secret to a stranger. But I am an old woman in a chair and cannot see the paper. You can. Go down when they have it out again on Thursday, as my eyes, with my leave in your mouth, and look at this thing they are all so sure of, and come up and tell me plainly whether it is my brother's or no. It is not my place to be in the study while his Grace's lawyers are at their business, my lady," said Nora, though everything in her had leaned toward the errand at the first word. "They will do as I bid or answer to me," said the old lady, "for I was born in this house. You will go. But mind me," and here the sharp voice dropped and grew almost gentle, "you will look, and hold your tongue, and bring what you see to me and no one else. Not to my great-nephew. You are a poor relation the whole county calls a fortune hunter, and he is a proud, grieving man, with clever lawyers swearing the paper sound. Carry him an accusation against his uncle's own cousin on nothing but your memory, and they will tell him, and he will half believe them, that the designing Ashe woman has hit on a bold new road to his notice. Get me something first that is not your word against theirs. Then we shall see." The great study at Aldermere was a high, sombre room panelled in dark oak, ranked with estate ledgers, and, along one wall, the pigeon-holed deed boxes and the brass-bound strong-box where the family's charters were kept. And over the carved mantel hung the great gilt-framed portrait of the old Duke himself, painted in his vigor, silver-haired and smiling faintly down. Nora had been in it 100 times in the last year, when it had been the old man's sick-room. She came in now, on the Thursday, with her father's spectacles in her pocket, and stood by the door with her hands folded. A gray, plain woman they had none of them thought to see. 3 men stood about the long table, the great codicil open in the wet north light, the young Duke at the head of it, still and dark and holding himself hard, turned on her a weary, closed, courteous patience, with no unkindness in it, and no warmth either. The old family solicitor, Miss Harkness, she knew by sight, a spare, grave, honest man of 60, with troubled eyes, who had drawn the true will years before, and plainly did not like his morning's work. And the third, easy and sorrowful at the table's foot, with soft white hands and a great collector's seal ring, an elegant gentleman of 45, with pale, clever eyes, she knew for Mr. Roderick Slade. "Her ladyship's woman," said the Duke, when Harkness had murmured her errand, in a low, level voice with no color in it. "My great-aunt wishes her own eyes at this, and cannot come, and so sends yours. She is entitled. The thing concerns her house. Look then, mistress, and carry her up what comfort you can find in it, though I fear there is none." And he stood back half a step and let her come to the paper. Mr. Slade smiled, a soft, cultivated smile, and turned the great parchment a little toward her with one finger. "Do not distress yourself over the law of it, my good woman. It is a melancholy business, but a plain one. Her ladyship may be assured on my own authority, I drew 100 such instruments before ever I managed this estate, that it is regular, and witnessed, and the late Duke's own hand and his own seal. One cannot argue with a sealed testament. Would to God one could." And Honora Ashe bent over the great codicil, in the gray north light, with her father's spectacles on her nose, and she read what she was shown, slowly, to the very marrow, and what she read stopped the breath in her throat, though not one line of her plain face moved. The signature was there, Aldermere, in the old Duke's own great looping hand, firm and flowing and complete. And that was the first wrongness, the one that turned her cold to the fingertips, for it was firm. It was the signature of a strong man with a steady pen, the signature the old Duke had written 10 years before, in his vigor. And Nora Ashe, who had sat at his side through the whole of his last year and written every letter that left his hand because his own would no longer serve him, knew past all arguing that by the 4th of March the old Duke could no more have written that firm, flowing name than risen from his bed and danced. The palsy had had him a 12-month. She had guided his fingers to make the wavering, blotted mark that was all he could manage at the last, and witnessed it, and set the date beside it in her book. The man who was said to have made that firm signature had had no firm hand left to make it with. And there was worse, for an eye that knew the room. The seal below the name was the old Aldermere device, the running greyhound, but it was the old seal, the cracked one, whose ring had split across the greyhound's back the winter before last, so that every impression it made carried a broken line through the beast, and the old Duke, vexed, had had the matrix cut fresh, and used only the new clean ring all his last year. Nora had sealed his letters with it a score of times, and noted the day the old one cracked in her almanac. The seal on this codicil was clean and whole, struck from the old matrix, or lifted in a cast from some letter years old, struck, at all events, by someone who did not know the true seal of the Duke's last year carried a broken line, because he had never sat in the room and watched the wax go down. And below, the 2 witnesses, a clerk's name she did not know, and, plain and black, Josiah Reeve. His mark, Reeve, whom she had watched die on the 19th of February, 3 weeks in his grave before ever the 4th of March came round. She said not one word of any of it. She straightened, folded her hands, made her face as blank as the strong-box, and said only, "I thank you, your grace. I have looked at it as her ladyship bade me. I will carry her up what I have seen," which was the whole and exact truth, and told them nothing at all. "A sensible creature," said Mr. Slade comfortably, already turning away. "Assure the old lady it is all quite regular. The kindest thing now is that it be done quickly and quietly." But the young Duke, an observant man beneath his grief, had seen something cross the gray woman's face in the half-second she bent to the seal. A stillness, a going cold, and it stayed with him oddly after she had gone, the first small crack in the smooth gray wall his cousin had built around him. Nora did not go straight up to Lady Emmeline. She went to her own narrow room and did the thing her father had taught her before ever she let her tongue accuse a paper. She turned it over and granted it every honest chance. Perhaps the palsy had had a good hour, but she had guided his hand herself, and no rally gave a dying man back the round, strong signature of his prime. Perhaps the old seal had strayed, but the old seal was cracked, and this was whole. Perhaps Reeves' name was a clerk's slip, but a dead man's name set to a document as a living witness is not a slip. Each mark alone she might have doubted, but they lay all one way, and pointed all together at the one conclusion her whole soul had recoiled from, that a good and honored dead man's name had been set to that paper by a living hand that meant to rob his heir, exactly as another paper had robbed her father, and that she alone had been in the room to know it. She went up to Lady Emmeline that evening and gave her the truth, but carefully. "I will not tell you it is your brother's, my lady, for I do not believe it is. But neither can I prove it before a court from one look across a table, and until I can it were a wickedness to say more. For the naming of a forgery is the breaking of the man that made it, and I have seen an innocent man broken on less. Give me leave to be sure. That is all I ask." The old lady was silent a moment, her clouded eyes on the fire. "I knew it," she said at last, very quietly. "I knew my brother never did this thing. What do you want to be sure? Things I can lay hands on that are not my word. The parish register, to prove Reeves' death under the vicar's own hand. Dr. Marrow, to say plainly what state your brother's writing hand was truly in that march, and the true will and his genuine late letters and the new seal ring, all set beside this codicil in the open, where his grace himself may see with his own eyes. But I cannot command one of those things. Only his grace can. And you told me not to go to his grace." "I told you not to go on your bare word," said Lady Emmeline. "You'll not be. Now go to Harkness first, old Harkness that drew the true will, and has been sick to his stomach over this codicil since it surfaced. He is honest as Sunday. Let it be Harkness, that no man can call a fortune hunter, who carries it up to my great-nephew." And Ashe, the dry hand, found hers and gripped hard. "Do it quietly, and tell no soul that could breathe a word to Slade. A man who has forged one paper will burn 10 to save his neck the moment he smells an honest eye upon him. Mr. Harkness kept a small dark chamber off the great study, all Japan boxes and the dry smell of old parchment, and Nora found him there alone the next morning. A lean, grave, weathered man with ink-stained hands, and a grief plainly still riding him. She stood in his doorway with her hands folded, a plain gray woman he had passed 100 times and never truly seen. "Misty Harkness, I am Miss Ashe, that reads to her ladyship. I have a thing to tell you that is not my place to tell, and that you had best forget you heard if I am wrong in it. I have looked at the codicil with her ladyship's leave, and there is that in it I do not like and dare not carry higher, being nobody. So I have come to ask you what an honest servant does, that has seen a thing she cannot yet prove and dare not name." Mr. Harkness set down his pen and looked at her a long, still moment with tired, honest eyes. "Sit down, Miss Ashe. I have proved the wills of this county 40 years, and learned the 2 kinds of trouble that come to a solicitor's door, the kind that is spite got up as duty, and the kind that is duty and frightened half to death of itself. You've the second look on you. And I will tell you plainly, before you speak, that I have not slept a whole night since that codicil came to light, for I drew the old Duke's true will with my own hand, and there is not one thing in that codicil that sounds to me like the man I served. But I am an old lawyer, and deal in proof, not feelings, and I have found none. If you have found any, in God's name let me hear it. On my own head, and no blame to you." So she told him the way her father had taught her to lay a doubt before a doubting man, not the conclusion first, but the marks, plain and cold. The signature firm and flowing, in the hand of a man whose palsy she had nursed a 12-month, and whose letters she had written because he could no longer hold a pen. The seal clean and whole, struck from the old cracked matrix out of use since the winter before last. And last, the witness, Josiah Reeve, dead the 19th of February, buried and settled when the codicil says his living hand set its mark to the wax. Each mark alone is a straw, Mr. Harkness. The hand might have rallied, you may say, the seal strayed, a name been miscopied. But they lie all one way. And the last is no straw at all, for it needs no learning of mine. A dead man cannot witness a paper, and Josiah Reeve was 3 weeks in his grave. The vicar's register will say so under his own hand. I do not ask you to believe my almanac. I ask you to send to the church. Mr. Harkness had gone very white about the mouth. "Reeve," he said. "God forgive me, his name is on it." And I read it, and thought only how fitting, the old man's own servant, and never once. I signed the note that admitted this thing toward probate, Miss Ashe. And you that read sermons to an old woman have seen in one look what I, that drew the true will, was too grieved and too trusting to see. He mastered himself. What would you need to make it proof past any man's doubting? The register, for Reeve. Dr. Marrow, for the hand, let him swear, as his honor as a physician binds him, what state the old Duke's writing was truly in that march. The new seal ring, to lay its clean greyhound beside the whole clean greyhound on the codicil, and show they are the same old device and not the broken one he truly used. And the true will and a fan of his genuine late letters, that the firm signature may be set among the shaking ones he truly made, and, if I am given a window, laid over the one earlier letter it was traced from. For a firm hand that could not exist, that march was copied from somewhere, and copied hands, laid one on another against the glass, lie together too perfectly ever to be two true signings. Set those beside the codicil in the open, before his grace himself, and no forgery on earth is clever enough to stand it. But it must be his grace who commands it. That is the one thing neither you nor I can do. Then it must go to his grace, said Mr. Harkness, and rose, slow and grave and suddenly resolved, for the will and the letters and the seal are his to command. Wait here, and say nothing to any living soul, and above all nothing that could reach Mr. Slade. I have watched clerks and stewards and fine cousins come and go under this roof 40 years, and I know an honest frightened truth when one stands telling it in my doorway against her own bread. I am going up to his grace. On my own head. Pray I have not misjudged him, for if I have, we are both turned off by dark, and my old master's name stolen forever. She was sent for within the hour. She came into the great study with her hands folded, and there stood the young Duke by the long bare table, the codicil gone back to its box, and Harkness grave at his shoulder, and no one else, for Slade was not there. The Duke looked at her a long moment with his cool, closed gray eyes, and when he spoke his voice was low and level and exact, with neither warmth nor unkindness, only the flat control of a man who has taught himself to give nothing away. You are the woman who reads to my great-aunt. Harkness tells me, and Harkness I would trust before any man living, that you have looked at the codicil, and say it is forged. He believes you, and do you know why? Not for your proofs, for he says you have laid him little he can carry to a court, but for the manner of your being afraid. That is not evidence, mistress. It is a feeling in an honest old man's breast, and old men who loved my uncle would give a great deal to believe him wronged. So I will ask you plainly, and you will answer plainly, or you will go back to my aunt's letters and we will both forget this hour. My cousin swears this codicil sound. 2 witnesses' names are on it. Harkness himself passed it toward probate. What is it you, who sat up with a sick old man, say you have found that all of them have missed? Nothing, your grace, that a clever man could not argue for an afternoon, save one thing, which no man can argue with at all. But before I give you the one, let me give you the manner of all of them. Every soul who has looked at that codicil has looked at the paper and trusted the men who vouch for it. I looked at the paper and set it against the room I sat in for a year. A codicil is a claim about a room, about what a dying man did, on a certain day, with a certain pen and a certain seal, before certain living men. I was in that room every day of that dying, and these gentlemen were not, and the codicil tells me 4 times over of a room I never saw. That checked him. He had looked for fright, or fawning, or a wild servant's accusation he could put down in a breath, and she had given him none of the 3. Tell me the 4, he said. Your uncle could not sign his name, your grace. She said it gently, for she saw it strike him. Not by the 4th of March, not for a year before he died. The palsy had his hand. I wrote his every letter at his dictation through the whole of his last year, in my own hand, and he set to them only a shaking, guided mark, and I can show you a dozen of them, worse month by month down to the end. The signature on that codicil is firm, and round and flowing. It is the hand he wrote in his strength, 10 years gone. A dying palsied man did not, on the 4th of March, sit up and write in the hand of his prime. It cannot be done. That is the first. Ask Dr. Marrow if I lie. The young Duke's jaw had tightened. Go on, he said, very low. The seal is the wrong seal. Your uncle's old ring cracked across the greyhound's back the winter before last. I have the day in my book. And he had the matrix cut fresh and used none but the new clean ring in all his last year. Every true impression of that year shows the clean new dye. But an impression made before the crack, or a cast lifted off some old letter, would show, as the codicil shows, a whole greyhound from the old dye, the one no honest paper of that March could have been sealed with, because it was broken and cast aside. Whoever sealed that codicil used a seal your uncle had not touched in a 12-month, because he was never in the room to know the ring had been changed. That is the second. And the third, said the Duke, and there was the smallest catch now in the level voice, you have already given Harkness, and it is the one you say no man can argue. Josiah Reeve, set to the codicil, plain and black, as a witness to a paper dated the 4th of March. And Reeve died on the 19th of February, and I sat with him at the end, and closed his eyes, and stood at his grave. He was 3 weeks buried on the day he is sworn to have witnessed that wax. The vicar's register will say the day of his burial under the vicar's own hand, past my word or yours. A dead man cannot witness a living paper. And a man who would set a dead servant's name to a codicil as a witness, thinking, no doubt, that a faithful old body servant lately gone would seem natural, and never be checked, is a man who did not know, or did not trouble to learn, that the servant was already in his grave. That is the third, and the fourth is the firm hand again, which I will not merely tell you, but show you against a window. so that you need believe no man's word for it, and least of all mine. The great study was very quiet. A bar of thin sun lay along the dark floor, and up over the mantel the old Duke smiled faintly down out of his gilt frame upon the reserved dark man who was his heir, and the gray woman who was nobody. And something moved behind the young Duke's closed gray eyes that was not warmth, but the flat, dawning, testing attention of a man who has heard, from the last quarter in the world he looked for it, a note with the unmistakable ring of truth. "You understand what you are telling me," he said at last, low. "You are not merely telling me my cousin is a thief. You are telling me my uncle did not disinherit me, did not, in his last weeks, in secret, unsay everything he had ever said to my face and leave me a duke with an empty house. You are telling me the one thing I have wanted to be told since they read that paper, and have not let myself hope for a single breath, because to hope it and be wrong would be to lose him twice. Do you know what it is, mistress, to hold such a hope out to a man and be wrong?" "I know exactly what it is, your grace," said Nora, very quietly, "for it was done to my own father, the other way about. A false hope of clearing his stolen name, held out and dashed, and it killed him inside 2 years. That is why I will not hold you a hope. I will hold you a proof, or I will hold you nothing. Give me the register, and Dr. Merrow, and the seal ring, and your uncle's true late letters, and one day, and I will lay it all before you in this room in the open, with Mr. Slade himself standing to answer it, and you may throw me off the estate the same hour if I am wrong in a single stroke. But I do not think I am wrong. I sat a year in that room. I never wanted to know what I know, and I am not wrong." "Then prove it," said the Duke of Aldermere, and drew a breath like a man stepping off a height. "Tomorrow here you shall have the will, and every letter of my uncle's Harkness holds, and the seal ring from his own dressing case and Merrow sent for, and the register fetched by my own groom. And I will have my cousin stand at this table too. For by God, if this thing is what you say, he shall answer it to my face, and not by a smooth letter from London. And if you are wrong, if you have slandered my uncle's own blood on a companion's fancy, I will not forgive it, of you or of myself. Do you understand me?" "Perfectly, your grace," said Honora Ashe. "Then let us make quite certain I am right. She was right. It is worth saying plainly, because the household did not believe it for a month, and the Duke scarcely let himself believe it for longer, that she was simply unglamorously right, in the way patient attention is right when cleverness has gone wrong. She spent that evening and half the night at the long table with Harkness, who would not leave her to it. They fetched the old Duke's letters box by box, the shaking dictated ones of the last year, each with its poor guided mark, laid out in their sad descending order. They were the whole plain history of a failing hand that no man could believe the round, strong signature had come from. Dr. Merrow came, and would swear on his oath as a physician that the Duke's writing hand had been past all firm signing since the spring 12-month. The groom came back from the church with the register itself, the vicar riding beside him, and there, under the vicar's own hand, stood the burial of Josiah Reeve, a fortnight and more before the 4th of March. From the dressing case they brought the new seal ring, struck a fresh impression, and its greyhound stood clean and whole and a different dye from the codicils. And then, in Harkness's own boxes, Nora found the very letter of 10 years back from which, laid against the candle, the codicil signature had plainly been traced, the two names lying one upon the other far too exactly ever to be two free signings. By the gray of morning she had it all, not a suspicion, but a thing as hard as a broken axle. The great study was full of clean morning light when they were all assembled, the Duke at the head of the table, still and closed, Harkness by the strong-box, Dr. Marrow and the vicar grave at the side, and Mr. Roderick Slade at the table's foot, elegant and faintly sorrowful, turning his great seal ring, with the small, indulgent look of a busy man summoned to humor a great house's grief. He had been told only that a question was raised and his cousin wished it settled, and plainly did not dream from what quarter it came. "Miss Ashe," said the Duke, "you have had the night, and the letters, and the register. Say now, before us all, what you have found, and let any man here fault it who can." Mr. Slade laughed, a warm, sorrowful laugh, and spread his soft white hands. "Your Grace, forgive me, but this is not seemly. Her ladyship's reader. The proving of a testament is the work of trained men, and I say to this good woman, kindly, that she is quite out of her depth. I examined the codicil myself. It is regular in every particular, and it is a cruelty to raise false hopes in a grieving house upon a companion's fancy, and I am sorry for it. But wishing does not. Your knowledge of instruments is not in question, Mr. Slade," said Nora, not loudly, but it carried the length of the somber room, because it did not shake. "I dispute no line of the law of it with you, for you know the law and I do not. I dispute the room. You made a paper that is perfect in law, and I do not wonder at it, for you are a lawyer. But you made it about a room you were never in, and I was in that room every day for a year, and it is the room that will not stand your paper up. May I begin, your Grace? There will be no doubt left in this room at the end of it." "Begin," said the Duke. And here is the thing that undid Roderick Slade and turned the bright study by slow degrees to a silence you could have heard a pin drop through. She did not accuse, and did not flourish, and did not raise her voice at all. She simply showed them the room. She laid out first the fan of the old Duke's true late letters, in their order down the last year, each in her own writing with its poor shaking mark at the foot, feebler month by month. Here, your Grace, is your uncle's own signing through the whole of his last year, the year the codicil says he signed a firm testament. Here, last spring, a wavering name he could just make with my fingers steadying his here at the new year, but a blotted cross, for the pen would no longer answer him. I wrote every word above these marks, because his hand could not, and Dr. Marrow attended him and will swear to it. The physician bowed his grave head. That is the hand your uncle truly had on the 4th of March, and this, she laid the codicil at the head of them, is the hand the codicil gives him. And the round, strong, flowing Aldermere lay among the poor failing marks like a hale man's shout in a room of the dying, and the young Duke's breath went out of him, and even Slade's soft hands had gone still upon the table. A man's hand does not grow young again a month before he dies. But leave the hand if any would argue a dying man might rally for an hour and come to the seal, which does not rally. She set the fresh impression struck from the true ring beside the seal on the codicil and offered the Duke her father's spectacles. Here is the impression of your uncle's own seal ring, struck last night, and here the seal on the codicil. Look at the greyhound's back in each. The true seal of his last year carries a broken line, for the ring cracked there the winter before last, and I sealed his letters with the new recut ring ever after. The seal on the codicil shows a whole greyhound, but from the old die, the cracked and cast aside one, as it printed before it broke. It is a seal your uncle had not laid to wax in a 12-month. It was set there by a hand that did not know the ring had ever been changed, a hand that was not in the room. "This is nothing," said Slade, but the warm voice had thinned. A crack, a dye, the fancies of a woman who has handled a little sealing wax and thinks herself a connoisseur. And a dying man's rally is the commonest thing in, Then leave the seal too, if a clever man may argue about wax till nightfall, and come to the witness, which no man can argue with, because it is not a matter of my eye or your learning, but of a date in a churchyard. The codicil is dated the 4th of March, and among its witnesses, in his own name and mark, stands Josiah Reeve. She turned to the table. Reeve, your uncle's body servant of 40 years, died on the 19th of February, and was buried on the 22nd. Here is the parish register in the vicar's own hand, and the vicar himself stands to own it. The vicar inclined his head, grim. A fortnight before the day this codicil says, Reeve set his living mark to its wax. He was 3 weeks in his grave. There is no rally out of that, and no wearing of a die. It is a dead man witnessing a living paper, and there is one plainer proof still, that I will stand or fall by. She lifted the codicil and that old letter of 10 years back, carried them to the tall window, and laid the one signature over the other against the light, and the whole room came to the window whether it would or no. And there, in the sun through the 2 sheets, the firm Aldermere of the codicil lay upon the firm Aldermere of the 10-year-old letter. Stroke for stroke, loop for loop, the long final flourish running out to the very same nothing. 2 names, sworn written years apart by the same free hand, lying each perfectly upon the other, exact, identical, impossible. No living hand did that, your grace, said Nora quietly into the silence, holding the light steady. A man cannot sign his own name twice, so that one signing covers the other. I could not. Your uncle could not. The king upon his throne could not, for a true signature is a thing done once and never once repeated. Only a tracing lies so true, a name laid over this very letter against the glass, exactly as I hold it now, and drawn through. That is not your uncle's signature written from his hand. It is his signature copied off this sheet, which has never left this house. And the man who traced it had the run of this house and its old letters and its cast-off seal, but was never once in the sick room to learn that the hand had failed, the ring had changed, and the old servant was dead. Mr. Slade had stopped turning his ring. This is a farrago, he said, and the smooth voice had a crack running through it now. A parcel of coincidences a hysterical woman has strung together. The date of a servant's death may be mistaken in a country register. An old seal used in error. A signature may resemble. Then hold the 2 papers up to the light yourself, Mr. Slade, said Nora, and turned, and held them out to him across the sunlit room. You are a trained man. You have proved 100 testaments. You need only lay the one signature over the other against this window, and tell this company they do not match. If they do not lie perfectly one upon the other, I am a slandering fool, and will go to the turnpike within the hour. Take them, sir. Hold them to the light. And Roderick Slade looked at the 2 sheets in her ink-stained hands, and at the blazing window, and did not put out his hand to take them, because he knew, as well as she did, what the light would show. And the silence of his not daring went round the bright study like a cold draught, and was a plainer confession than any words. He had built 45 years of respectability on the certainty that no one beneath him would ever dare to check his word, and a poor relation in a gray gown had asked him to hold 2 papers to a window, and he could not, and every soul in the room saw it. I will not, he said at last, thickly, be catechized at a window by a lady's companion, over a dead servant and a housemaid's wax. My standing in this county, your standing, sir, said the Duke of Aldermere, and his low voice had gone very quiet and very terrible, has just declined to hold 2 papers up to the light. I have my answer." And he turned from his cousin as though the man had ceased to occupy the room, and looked instead at Honora Ashe, and something had come up behind the closed gray eyes that was not testing but a stunned and dawning wonder. "You have not only told me the codicil is forged, Miss Ashe. You have shown it me, 4 ways over, so that I need believe no man's word, not even yours. My uncle did not disinherit me. He did not fail me. He was robbed of his good name in his grave, and I of my birthright, by a man who had the run of his papers and none of his heart. He mastered himself, and something in his face had changed for good. Stay, there is a great tangle here yet, how it was done, and by what hired hand, and how it is to be proved to a court and my uncle's memory set right, and it will want an honest reader of papers who cannot be frightened and cannot be bought, and there is but one such within my reach. Will you do it?" "I'll do it, your grace," said Honora Ashe, gathering her almanac and her ordered sheets. "It will take some weeks to trace the whole of it to its root, whose the pen was, and where the paper was got, for it was not Mr. Slade's own hand that did the writing, but a trained hired hand, and a trained hand leaves its own small habits even in another man's letters. But it can be done by anyone with the patience to read what is in front of them, and the nerve not to be dazzled by a great name. I'll give you back your birthright whole and proven, and your uncle's honor with it. Only let every step be done in the open daylight, so that no man may ever call it a poor relation's spite." Roderick Slade went out of the great study, upright and white and dangerous, and at the door he turned and looked at Nora with his pale, clever eyes, and said softly, so that it carried the length of the room, "You are a very clever woman, Miss Ashe, for a lady's companion. It is a pity. Clever women who forget their place are so very easily shown to the world for what they truly are." And he was gone, and the threat hung cold in the sunlit air behind him, and Nora, who had faced the ruin of her own father, felt it settle along her spine and knew the man was not finished, and that the next battle would be fought not over the paper, which was past all saving now, but over her. She thought, standing in the clean morning light, well, the truth is out of the paper now, and cannot be inked back over. But she thought, too, that she would prove the tangle and clear the good name, and go quietly back to Lady Emmeline's letters and her Charity's place. The same gray woman she had always been, and in that she was wrong, and this time for the rest of her life. For she did not go back to the reading desk. She was given the whole tangle to trace, and through the long, bright summer she worked it back to its root. She traced the paper to a stationer in the county town of Marbury, whose day book showed the choir bought 2 winters since by a shabby drink, ruined attorney's clerk named Ezra Peck, once a fair engrossing scrivener, and now a hired pen for any gentleman's dirty work, and in Peck's own copying she found the small, incurable tell, a hitch in a looped letter that no care could smooth, sitting in the traced hand of the codicil like a stranger's footprint. And Peck, frightened and promised he should not hang if he told a magistrate the truth, gave up in the end the soft-handed gentleman with the great seal ring who had brought him the old letter to copy and the cast seal to strike and the 4th of March to date it, never dreaming that the servant whose name he chose for a witness was already dead, nor that a gray woman by the sick-room fire had watched the true seal crack and the true hand fail. So the thing stood whole and proven long before the summer's end, in a sheaf of sworn papers no court could refuse. The forgery, the forger's confession, and the black motive under it all, that Roderick Slade, run deep into his own secret debts, had meant through the forged codicil to seize the whole unentailed Aldermere fortune under the sacred cover of a dead man's wishes, and either hold it outright or keep the young duke forever in his power as a titled pauper begging his cousin for the means to live. He had reckoned every soul in the business, the grieving heir, the trusting lawyer, the credulous county, and left out only the one beneath all reckoning, the poor relation who read an old lady her letters and happened to have sat in the room. And through that same summer, the young duke came down to the great study morning and evening, and asked her questions, and, stranger yet, listened to the answers, and by degrees so small neither could afterward name the day. They fell into the strangest intimacy either had known, that of two solitary people bent together over the same exact, honest, dangerous work, where rank thins almost to nothing. And a grieving man cannot go on pretending that the woman clearing his uncle's stolen name is beneath his notice. "They are afraid of me," he said to her one gray afternoon, both at the long table while the rain ticked at the window, "every soul on this estate. I say a lease is renewed, and the man thanks me before the words are out of my mouth. My own lawyers told me the codicil was sound because it was easier than telling a duke he had been robbed. And you contradict me a dozen times a day, over a date, over the sense of a word, and never once soften it. Why do you never flatter me, Miss Ashe, when the whole world does? Because the whole world wants something of you, your grace, and I want nothing," said Nora, not looking up from her sheet. "A place, a rise, a favor, a fright spared, every flatterer in your house has a reason, and the reason is always himself. I have an almanac and a pair of eyes and a memory I never asked for, and the good name of Ashe, which is worth nothing to a living soul but me, and not one of the three is in your gift to give or take away. A person who wants nothing of you is the only soul in the world who can afford to tell you the truth. You would do well to keep one always by you. They are worth more than the cleverest man of business in England, and a great deal harder to come by, and they never once send in a bill." He was quiet at that, and she did not see the look on his face, for she had learned young that men say the truest things when they are not being looked at, and presently he told her the thing he had told no one. "I was so ready to believe it," he said, low, staring at the rain. "That is what shames me past the theft itself. When they read that codicil, some part of me, God forgive me, almost bowed to it, because if my uncle had turned from me and given all away, his death had left me a plain rejection I could be wretched over and mend nothing. What I could not bear to hope was that he had loved me to the end, for then I must fight for him, and to fight was to risk losing him twice. So I never questioned the paper. My cousin held out to me a wound, and I took it, because a wound is easier to carry than a hope. You held the hope up to the light, and left me the plain grief which is heavier and truer and mine." "Then do not try, your grace," said Nora. "I did not do it for thanks. I did it because I could not do otherwise, because a paper cried out to me across a table that it was lying, and I have never been able to leave a lie in a paper lying, any more than you could ride past a man drowning in a pond. My father was the same, and it cost him everything." She set down her pen. "You should know the whole of me, since you have told me the whole of you, and it is a short tale. My father was an honest gentleman robbed of his small estate by a cousin's lawsuit and a will that could not quite be proved false. A gentleman's word believed over a plainer man's, and he died of it inside 2 years. An honest man robbed by a paper to the last, and I was 19 and nobody, and could not save him. So when I saw another honest dead man robbed of his name and his heir of his birthright by another paper, and I of all the world the one who had been in the room to see the theft, I found I could not sit by the fire and hold my tongue and be safe. That is the whole of me. There is no more." The Duke of Aldermere said nothing for a long moment, and when he spoke it was only, very low, "It is a very great deal more than most people are, Miss Ashe," and he did not trust himself to say the rest, and went instead to the window, turning over something he had long thought settled about the sort of woman a man in his place might come to value. For the household had begun to feel the change, and it pleased them less than it pleased her. Mrs. Tranter, the housekeeper, jealous of every inch of her standing, took to a cold civility worse than rudeness, and let fall in the servants' hall, meaning to be overheard, that some folk who had come into a house with one box and a charity's welcome had grown very grand of late, and that she knew a fortune hunter's long game when she saw it played, however plain the face. And the county, hearing the young Duke's own cousin was disgraced and gone through the meddling of the great aunt's poor relation, did not say how brave, it said over its port, that the designing Ashe woman had cooked up a wicked tale to make herself indispensable to a grieving Duke, and they should all see within the 12-month what she had truly angled for. Nora let the whispers break over her like weather, and only to Harkness said anything of it at all. "They think I did it to catch him," she said, not bitterly, only tired. "Every soul from the still room to the Lord Lieutenant. They cannot imagine I did it because it was true." "They think," said Harkness, looking up with his tired, honest eyes, "what small, comfortable people always think when one of the overlooked proves worth more than the whole gilded rest of them, that it must be by some low trick, since it cannot be by plain desert, for if it were desert, then any of them might have sat in that sick room and seen what you saw, and did not, and there is no thought less comfortable than that one. Pay it no mind. You have given a dead master back his honor, and a living one back his birthright. If the county cannot bear the sight of that, the fault is in the county, and not in you." And he took up his sheet and went back to it, and left Nora understanding for the first time that she stood between two worlds and belonged wholly to neither. A lonely place to stand, and one that would grow lonelier before ever it grew otherwise. Roderick Slade was not so easily done with as a man caught out ought to be. The Duke, unwilling in the raw first grief to loose a public scandal upon his own blood, had not yet gone to the magistrate, and Slade, with 45 years of standing to save and the pit of the law at his back, spent that summer not in shame but in building a defense. And his defense, since the paper was past all denying, was not to defend the codicil but to destroy the woman, to have the meddling poor relation shown to the county as a scheming, half-taught fortune hunter, so that no gentleman need ever weigh her word. In this he had ready allies, Mrs. Tranter, nursing her grievance, a pompous county magnate or two, and the county's own sweet willingness to believe the worst of a plain poor woman who had risen. He came in the last week of August, when the sworn papers were all but ready for the magistrate, not humbly but in a bluster dressed as injured innocents, with a sharp hired attorney at his elbow and 2 credulous county gentlemen in his train, resolved to fight in the open, before the assembled household, where a poor relation might be shouted down by 45 years of gentility. He swept into the great hall where the Duke stood among his people, and flung out one soft ringed hand at Nora, who had come down with the papers under her arm and stopped dead at the sight of the gathered room. "Your Grace, I come for justice," he said, loud and rolling. "I have been these 3 months a slandered man, my name cried down before the whole county, and upon whose word? Upon the word of that woman there, a poor relation, a reader of sermons to a bedridden old lady that came into this house 21 years ago with a single box. For her own father was a ruined man disgraced in a suit for fraud. Ask where you will, and who has. Out of the oldest ambition of her scheming sex, got up a farrago of dead servants and cracked seals to ruin your nearest kinsman and leave herself the one indispensable woman at a lonely duke's elbow. Whoever gave a lady's companion leave to overturn the settled judgment of gentlemen and the law? I demand she be turned off this estate before she blackens it, and me and you past mending. It's plain as paint, your grace, put in one of the county gentlemen, red and pompous, a fortune hunter, and a low-born one. There's a word for women who worm their way toward great men by ruining honest gentlemen, and it is not a word I'll soil my mouth with in this company. Nora might have borne it in silence. She had borne a great deal in silence in 40 years, but she saw the young duke draw breath to speak, saw in his face that he meant to fling his whole newly inherited name before his entire household on the side of a poor relation against his own blood. And she could not let him. A great man may keep a clever reader. He may not be seen to stake his ducal honor on one against his kinsman, not without a whisper following him all his days that his aunt's gray companion had bewitched him into it. She saw the whole of it in the half-second before he spoke, and stepped forward and spoke first, and headed him off from ruining himself for her sake. "No, your grace," she said. "Let me." And she folded her ink-stained hands before her gray gown and faced Roderick Slade, and her voice was not loud, but it carried the length of the great hall, because it did not shake. "Mr. Slade, you say I am ignorant, and a schemer, and my father a fraud. My father was an honest man robbed by a paper exactly like the one you made, and I will not defend his grave to this company. It does not need me, and neither in the end does yours. You say I did this to catch a husband. Then hear me, sir. Before them all, I want nothing in this house that I did not bring into it. No place, no rise, no marriage, no coin above the charity I have always had. I have claimed one thing only, and I claim it still, that I sat in a room you were never in, and no fine name and no length of standing can make a dead man sign, or a cracked seal whole, or a buried servant witness a paper. Those are not a woman's wiles, sir. They are facts, written in a churchyard and a physician's oath and the wax itself, and they care nothing whether the eye that reads them sits in a great man's face or a poor woman's." She took a step, and Roderick Slade, to his own visible surprise, took one back. "You say I got up a farrago. Then send for other eyes than mine. Send for the king's own proctor, for any honest solicitor in England, and set before him what I set before his grace. A firm signature from a hand 3 physicians will swear was palsied past all signing. A seal from a die cast aside a year before the date. A witness a fortnight in his grave, under the vicar's own register, and a name traced stroke for stroke off a letter 10 years old, that anyone may lay to the light and see. And send to Marbury for Mr. Ezra Peck, the ruined scrivener whose hired pen did your writing for your money, and who has sworn the whole of it to a magistrate this fortnight past, and named the soft-handed gentleman with the great seal ring who brought him the letter to trace, and the day to date it. It does not need me, Mr. Slade. I found it, but I am not it. You came here to put out the one pair of eyes that troubled to look, and you are far too late, for the eyes have taught the whole of it to men no turning off of a poor relation can silence now. The silence in the great hall was total. The late summer light lay gold along the flags, and no one moved. Roderick Slade had gone the color of tallow, and his sharp hired attorney had leaned in and was murmuring something low and final in his ear, having plainly smelled a hopeless brief and a client who had lied to him. And the 2 county gentlemen had taken a step apart from him, as men step back from one the crowd has turned upon. "This is a conspiracy of servants and paupers," said Slade, But the roll had gone thin as water, and no court will credit a drunken scribbler and a scheming, but even he heard how it fell into the silence, and did not finish it. He looked once round the ring of still faces and found not one to meet his eye, and he turned on his heel and went the whole length of the great hall and out at the door, upright still but walking fast, his attorney already a half-step behind him talking low of withdrawing from the cause. And the sound of his carriage going off down the avenue came back up between the walls of the house. And Honora Ashe stood in the enormous quiet, with her hands folded and her heart going hard, and thought, with a strange calm, "Well, now I shall be turned off in my turn, for a great house cannot easily keep the grey poor relation who shamed its master's kinsman before the county." "Miss Ashe," said the Duke of Aldermere, and it was the first time in 21 years that anyone in that house had said her name as though it were an honor, "will you come into the small library, where it is quiet? There is a great deal I find I wish to say to you, and I had rather not shout it the length of my own hall." He shut the door of the little book-lined room behind them, where the low gold light of the late afternoon fell across the shelves, and one tall window looked down the home park, and Nora stood in the middle of it with her hands folded, and waited to be thanked and pensioned off, and had her small speech ready, how she would go without fuss, how she asked only a character, that she might find some other house that wanted a plain woman who could read a true paper. He offered her, first, money, a sum that made her sit down without meaning to. She refused it. He offered next to make her keeper of the estate's papers over any man of business in England, with a salary and rooms of her own, and the freedom of the library for life, and this she did not refuse, but neither did she answer, for she could see in his face that it was not the thing he had brought her into the quiet room to say, and that he was working his way toward the true thing by the road of the easier ones. "Alistair," she said then, more quietly. She had never used his name, and did not know she was going to, and the sound of it stopped him as though she had laid a flat hand against his chest. "There, I have said it, and the roof has not come down. Now say your piece plainly, your grace, and I will say mine, and let us neither of us be cowards about it, for I am too old to be courted round the houses, and you are too honest to enjoy the doing of it." So he said it, plainly, in the plain words they had both come to trust. "You stood in my hall not an hour since, and would not let me defend you. Do you know why that undid me, when nothing in all my life has? Because I saw what you were doing. You saw, quicker than I did, that if I spent my name on you, before the whole county they would say you had bewitched me into it, and you would sooner take that man's filth full in the face and walk out onto the road without a character than let the defending of you cost me a shilling of my standing. A woman with nothing shielded a duke, who has everything, and meant to walk out of my life without letting me thank her. And I understood all at once that in the whole of my guarded life I have never once been valued by a soul who wanted nothing from me, and was on the point of letting her walk away and go back to reading another old woman her letters. I am not offering you rank," he went on, and the level voice went for a moment unsteady. "Rank is nothing. It came to me out of my uncle's grave, and all but cost me my birthright to a lie. I am offering you the only thing I have ever found worth the giving, a partnership of equals. In the plain sight of God, my name to yours, and my judgment laid open to your plain sense every day we both live. Spend what is left of our years keeping me honest, for there is no one else alive I would trust to try it, and I cannot go back to being flattered now that I have once been told the truth. You taught me the difference between being served and being told the truth, and a man cannot unknow that, and I will have no other woman in England but the one who taught it to me across a table of forged paper. Honora Ashe was 40 years old and had prided herself her whole life on having no illusions, and she discovered in that little room that she had nursed the largest illusion of all, the one that had told her, since she was young and plain and poor and orphaned by a stolen birthright, that a woman like her was not permitted, by God or the world, to be simply and wholly loved for exactly what she was. "They will say I am a fortune hunter," she said, when she could speak. "They have said it for 21 years on no evidence at all. Marry me, and you hand them their proof. They will say it of me until I die, and some of them after, that the gray poor relation cried forgery to disgrace your cousin and creep into your bed, that she planned the whole from the first, that you were gulled by a designing spinster twice as neatly as ever your cousin thought to gull you. You know they will. You have lived among them." "I know them to the bone," he said, "and I do not care one straw for the opinion of people I do not respect, upon a matter they cannot understand, concerning the only happiness I have ever been offered. They will say the Duke of Aldermere married the woman who saw, with an old almanac and one night's patience, the forgery that a trained man of business had staked his name upon, who gave my uncle back his honor and me my whole birthright, and who would have walked away and let them call her a schemer sooner than cost me a shilling of my pride. Let them say it. It is even true, every word." And he held out his hand to her, not a lord's hand offered to be kissed, but a plain hand, open, palm up, level, between equals. "Honora, I have asked you a question. You have never in your life left an honest question unanswered to spare anyone's feelings. Do not begin now." And Honora Ashe, poor relation of the house of Aldermere, looked at the offered hand, and at the gray eyes that had learned, at 33, not to lie to her, and she gave him the truth, as she had given him nothing but the truth from the first hour, because the truth was the only dowry she had ever owned, and it turned out to be the only one he had ever wanted. "Yes," she said, "God help the pair of us." Yes, they were married in the small gray parish church at the edge of the home park, quietly, in the first week of October, with the whole scandalous county watching from behind its curtains and not one of it invited. Mr. Harkness gave the bride away and thought his old heart would crack with the rightness of it, standing in for the honest dead master whose name she had cleared. And Mrs. Tranter, who had come to gape and stayed to be ashamed, wept through the whole of the service. And old Lady Emmeline, by far the shrewdest for the match, told the whispering pews that her great-nephew had done the one wholly sensible thing of his life in marrying the only person under his roof with a pair of eyes in her head and the courage to use them. And when the plain vows were said, the little church was so still they could hear the rooks in the elms. And more than one hard old tenant said afterward that the silence when the gray poor relation became the Duchess of Aldermere was the silence of a whole small world quietly rearranging itself around a truth it had not seen coming. She never played the great lady, and never once tried to. She wore good plain gowns and no jewels to speak of, kept her father's almanac and his steel-rimmed spectacles in her writing-table drawer, and went down to the great study most mornings to keep the estate's papers true in her own hand. And Roderick Slade, when the sworn case was laid at last before the magistrate and the scrivener Peck told the whole of it under oath, found his learned name and his 45 years of standing worth precisely nothing, he fled the country a step ahead of the law and died abroad some years after, shabby and disbelieved and small, which is a colder ruin than any prison. And the Netherly lands and the whole unentailed fortune came back to the young Duke entire, and not a tenant was turned off, and the old Duke's true will stood as he had truly made it, and over the mantel his painted face smiled down, cleared, and honored, upon the room where a gray woman had held 2 papers to the window and given him back his name. She taught, in the years that followed, clever young women under her, tenants and craftsmen's grown kinswomen with quick eyes and no prospects, to read a hand and a seal and a date, and the plain forms of a will and a deed, that they might never once be gulled by a fine name at the foot of a lie. And she and the Duke were the most quietly contented couple in the shire, and his Grace, who had come into his title grief hollowed and shut as a locked strong-box, grew into a man at ease in his own skin, who could laugh and be argued with over a date of a morning, and looked at his unlikely Duchess across the breakfast table as though he could not quite believe his own good fortune, and never learned to take it for granted, which is the whole art of a long happiness. He lived another 32 years, and died at last in his own bed, his hand in her ink-stained one and no stranger in the room. She sat with him at the end as she had sat over his uncle's stolen name at the beginning, still and true, and told him the truth to the very last, which was that he had been a great deal of trouble and worth every hour of it. And he laughed his quiet laugh one final time, and told her she was the one true thing he had ever been given, and slept and did not wake, and she closed his gray eyes herself and did not weep until the door was shut. She outlived him by 7 years, and kept the estate's papers true to the end, and was, by the time she followed him, so beloved across that whole broad reach of shire that they lined the lanes for her funeral 3 deep, tenants and carriers and the households of the women she had taught to read a true instrument, far more than ever lined them for any duke, and among them not a few of the fine folk who had once called her a fortune hunter, and lived long enough to be ashamed of it. And they carried behind her coffin, on a cushion, her father's horn-cased almanac and his steel-rimmed spectacles, which the whole shire agreed was a stranger honor than any crest, and no more than her due. There is an old saying among the country solicitors who prove the wills of the dead, that a man may buy any number of hands to swear to a lie, but he can never buy the one witness that matters, that ink can be aged and a seal cast and a dead man's name set to a paper he never saw, but there is always someone who was in the room and knows what the dying man truly did and truly could not do. Honora Ashe read to the elders of Aldermere for 21 years, and sat up the long nights with its sick and its dying, before a soul above the housekeeper troubled to learn her name, and for 32 years after as its mistress, and never once called a false thing true to spare a great person's feelings. She was not saved by her meekness, nor by her beauty, for she had neither. She was saved, if saved is the word for the woman who did the saving, by the plain, unfakeable fact of what she alone had been present to know, and by the courage to stake everything upon it in a world forever dazzled by a great name and the sacred seal of a dead man's will. A forger who could hire any hand in England to swear to his paper had forgotten the one witness he could never buy, the gray woman by the fire that nobody had looked at in years, and it made her the truest witness in the county. The tenants whose farms she saved said it first, and the women she taught to read a true paper said it after. And in the fullness of years, even the great folk who had scorned her came round to saying it too, until it was less an opinion than a fact of the country, worn smooth with the saying, that a plain gray-gowned poor relation with an old almanac and a pair of steady eyes had sat in a room that everyone forgot she was in, and remembered it so truly that she saw through a forgery the trained men of the law had sworn was sound, and gave a dead master back his honor and a living one back his birthright, and asked nothing at all for it. And whenever, long after, a proud man was flattered toward his ruin, or a wise woman overlooked for her plainness. It was said that the one witness the forger never thought to reckon was the very one who undid him, and it made her the truest witness in the county. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what this story made you feel. And if it moved you, consider subscribing softly so you won't miss the next one.